Lewis, coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and more specifically, beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And welcome to Midday with Reverend Don. I hope you're having a wonderful day today, and we are going to have a lovely conversation. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments into whatever platform you happen to be watching on. They will appear here in my chat room where we can talk directly. And this is one of my favorite parts of this broadcast. So today, we are going to be talking about Friday the 13th. But before we have that conversation, I have a couple of announcements. The first one is that next week, I will be doing a week of best of programs because I will not be here in my office to broadcast live. And I will have more information about what's going on with that here in the near future. And tomorrow, our program is going to be a ritual program. We're going to have a ritual for the new moon and solar eclipse, which is happening this Saturday. And I think that will be fun. It will be a ritual that you can do yourself on Saturday, if you wish to do so, to take advantage of these very interesting energies. And tomorrow we'll talk a little bit more about that. Today we're going to talk about Friday the 13th. And, you know, for a lot of people, Friday the 13th is considered an unlucky date. But many people in the magical community think of it as being a very lucky date. And hello to Mary Cavalcante in the chat room. It's good to see you, Mary. Many of us regard it as being a lucky date and treat it that way. Hello to Renee in the chat room. It's good to see you. And hello to Magical Mermaid in the chat room. And hello to Janet in the chat room. Oh, it's good to see all of you. I personally have always tended to see Friday the 13th in that sense as a lucky date. But what makes it a significant date either way? And there's no real agreement on that. There are a number of different theories. Some of them are currently more popular than others, but that does not necessarily discount the others. And it's also worth noting that there may not be a single origin to the superstitions around this date. It may be a confluence of a number of things. So one of the things going on with Friday the 13th is the number 13 itself. A lot of people have a feeling that the number 13 itself is unlucky. And in fact, there are a number of people who have a phobia of the number 13, and that phobia is called tridescophobia. And people have a number of different reactions to that. You may have heard that many buildings don't have a 13th floor for this reason. I don't know that that's as true as it once was, but it is something that you do actually sometimes encounter. The number 13 follows the number 12, which is normally considered to be a full cycle because of the cycle of the zodiac, the months of the solar year, etc. And so 13 is a new beginning, but also the breaking of the old cycle. And this has caused some people to see it as being an inauspicious number. Historically, there are also things like in the Christian religion, Jesus had a total of 13 disciples, counting Judas, but Judas, the 13th disciple, betrayed him, giving people from that background an idea of the number 13 as being inauspicious. This has not always been the way it's been looked at. If we look at the Olympian gods, there were 12 of them, and then they switched their numbers around a little bit. And brought in Dionysus to become one of the Olympian gods who wasn't originally. But that was not considered to be an unlucky thing, just because it moved the gods around a little bit. But many people do have that fear of the number 13. And Magical Mermaid remarks that 13 is a baker's dozen. And yes, it's the complete number 12 plus one more. So you can also think of it in that sense as being that lucky extra thing. Now, in a lunar year, 13 months rather than 12 is often considered to be the norm. And this is one reason that many pagans consider the number 13 to be um, an auspicious number. And the day of the week, Friday, is named for the goddess Venus and various versions of that goddess in different cultures. And the combination of the 13 months of the lunar year and the goddess day is one reason that many people in, for example, the Wiccan community think of Friday the 13th as being a sacred date with a strong association to feminine energy. It is also the date on which the Knights Templar were proscribed and arrested en masse back in the 14th century. And the prevailing wisdom at present is that that is probably the source for the unlucky connotation of Friday the 13th. But as I said before, that prevailing wisdom changes frequently. And the fact that opinion holds this is the most likely source doesn't necessarily mean that it's true or that there's only one source, but it is something very worth looking at. The Knights Templar, if you're not familiar with them, were a very powerful order of knighthood in the Middle Ages. They were originally headquartered in the Middle East, and they became very powerful, particularly working as bankers for the European royal houses. They were a military order. They were charged with protecting the Near Eastern territories. And for a long time, they were very successful and they became immensely wealthy. In the late 13th century, the last of those Near Eastern territories that were held by European powers fell, and the Knights Templar were forced to retreat back to Europe, where they were still very wealthy and still very powerful, but nowhere near as appreciated. And in the early 14th century, Philip the Fair of France moved against them, and with the help of the Pope at that time, who was firmly under the king's power, they proscribed the entire order and had as many of them as they could reach arrested and confiscated their properties, which were immensely broad. The general feeling is that that was the reason for the move. The king already owed the Knights Templar a great deal of money, which of course he got out of paying by proscribing them. And of course he and other European powers obtained a great deal of money from this action. Hello to Tom in the chat room. It's good to see you. And this began on a Friday the 13th. I don't know personally that number was so well remembered that I think it is the sole source of this particular group of beliefs around the date of Friday the 13th. I do believe that it probably is one of the causes, but I doubt that it's all of them. But the prevailing wisdom cites it as the primary cause. In pursuing this, the King of France and the Pope, and hello to Kazan in the chat room, it's good to see you, built a case against the Knights Templar of religious heresy, basically that they were following a pagan cult within their order. And that cult was centered on a figure called Baphomet. Now, we did a full show on the subject of Baphomet at one time, but I'm going to talk a little bit about Baphomet now. Baphomet, there's a lot of debate as to whether the Knights Templar were actually worshiping a figure called Baphomet, or whether this was entirely made up. And one of the reasons for that is there are so many different descriptions of this deity and how it was depicted. However, that isn't necessarily proof that it wasn't there. Um, it's often said that the name Baphomet is a corruption of the name Mohammed, but that makes no sense at all because the people of that era were perfectly familiar with the name Mohammed. No one would have mistaken anything else for it. But they could have used it as a basis to create a gibberish name if they wanted to. But Baphomet isn't necessarily gibberish. Um, there is a strong theory that it comes from the Greek words Baphometis, which means baptized in wisdom or washed in wisdom. And in terms of how it was portrayed, it seems to be a conglomeration of a number of different symbols, which is very much in keeping with deities of late classical antiquity. Um, and so it may very well have been, and possibly even quite an old cult that they found in the Middle East and continued, or it could all have been made up. Either way, Baphomet certainly came to be worshipped as a deity afterwards and is very much still worshipped today in a number of different forms, ranging from the very beneficent god of wisdom to various would-be demonic forms. But as for what the Knights Templar did, there's no real knowledge because any evidence that existed that can be accessed now was extracted under torture, and you really cannot take seriously things extracted under torture. Historically, there have been a number of items that have been found and attributed to the cult of Baphomet. Hello to Eve in the chat room. Good to see you, Eve. But whether they actually were or not, or merely seem to be similar, is hard to say, or whether they might be forgeries. But there are a number of interesting objects which show the deity Baphomet, again, in a manner that strongly resembles late classical antique ideas, um, as well as some of our modern ideas. A number of the images show the deity seemingly chained to the physical world, um, or it chained to the deity, which in modern terminology also looks a little bit like the double helix, at least to my eyes. But again, there's no knowing how much of this was or was not true. And that's a very relevant fact to a lot of history. But these are some of the reasons that people think that Friday the 13th has come to be seen as unlucky or lucky. Those who believe that it has a strong association with goddess worship feel that people from Judeo-Christian religions look at it as being unlucky for that reason, while they themselves look at it as being particularly auspicious. So as far as the origin of the beliefs, I would say pick the one you like. There's no real certainty. But as far as today, as I say, many people in the metaphysical world view Friday the 13th as an auspicious and lucky day, as do I. So tomorrow is Friday the 13th of October, and I regard that as a very auspicious day, particularly coming in October, as we're approaching the Samhain holiday. The other thing that makes this particular Friday the 13th a little more auspicious is that it's the eve of the new moon and solar eclipse coming on Saturday the 14th. And this is an interesting combination of energies. The new moon is new beginnings, and solar eclipses, at least to me, represent new beginnings as well. They're the end of one cycle, the start of another. And I'll tell you for myself, I'm hoping that it will have very much that character of renewal and regeneration. That's what I see in solar eclipses. Other people see them as being inauspicious because the sun loses its light for a moment. Historically, they're often associated with the death of important figures. Um, but, I am very much of the point of view that everything you look at, what you take from it depends on the angle you're looking from. If you're looking at the solar eclipse in terms of the loss of the sun's light, well, then it's definitely inauspicious. But if you're looking at it in terms of the return and renewal of the sun's light, well, then I see it as an auspicious thing. And hello to Devika, who is coming to us from India. It's very good to see you, Devika. Welcome. Um, and so tomorrow we're going to have a ritual to attune to these energies. We will be doing it here for ourselves tomorrow. And if you would like to use this during the actual eclipse period itself, I would strongly encourage it. And it will be a ritual of rejuvenation and renewal. I, this is my 60th year. It has been very interesting so far. They say that the 60th year is a new beginning, the completion of a cycle and beginning of a new one. In Asian astrology, it means that you've gone completely through all of the ramifications of the Asian zodiac. Um, and there are a number of different ways to look at it, but um, among other things, you are coming out of your second Saturn return, and it's definitely an interesting time. For me, it's been a time of total recalibration, um, and total renewal of my life. At times, it has seemed a little bit more like the ending of my life. But as you can see by my sitting here, that did not happen. I survived the various health issues I've been facing. There are certainly more that will have to be survived. Um, but everything is looking, to my eyes, fairly positive at this point. Um, but in terms of this particular occurrence, I really very much want to focus on that rejuvenation and renewal. And I hope that you will join me in that. And Magical Mermaid says rebirth. And exactly. Just as the sun is reborn after being extinguished, so may we all be reborn and go forward um, toward a good and strong future. And Tom says at 60, we're on the journey to becoming an elder. Well, yes, we are. Um, some of us are a little farther on that journey than others. Um, and, it's interesting growing older. And I guess the best way to look at it is an adventure to be enjoyed. And I've always believed life should get better as you go. And as we get older, we lose some of our physical capacities, which is something I've been dealing with. But ideally, this is made up for in the joy that we can find in life. And that is very much what I am hoping to focus on for the remaining years that I have. When I started this year, I had no idea where it was going to go. At the time of my retirement as chancellor, part of my idea was to really focus on being an artist, and I am looking forward to doing more of that. One of the things we're talking about, which I mentioned yesterday, is a graphic novel around the start of next year. And I'm quite excited about that project. I've got a lot of projects actually in the works. And I'm thinking that at least for the next few years, that's what I hope to be doing, writing more books, doing artwork, teaching. And hello to Christine in the chat room. It's good to see you, Christine. I'm not expecting to travel as much as I've done in previous years. I'm finding travel much harder now than it previously was, although that doesn't mean that I won't travel. I just came back from Nashville Pagan Pride, and the general feeling after that adventure was that I really can no longer travel alone. Um, and I have to, for the most part, agree with that. Unless we're talking about smaller distances. Um, but some of the things that were once easier as I've gotten older have become harder. And, that's only to be expected. But I do have to say, I remember Lady Olivia. Olivia Robertson, the co-founder of the Fellowship of Isis, and she was still traveling alone in her 90s around the world. And I always thought that would be rather nice. I don't know that I'm relatively certain I will not be in my 90s, but I am still hoping for some nice travel in the future. And Kazan says of seven archetypes, over 60 is the role of sorcerer. And yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. And I plan to do a lot more working publicly with the spirits and the dead. I've worked with that my entire life, but the Corellian Book of the Dead is only one of the things I'm planning for the future, dealing with that work in the spirit world. And we'll see what all comes from that. I have my Patreon that is running. I'm hoping to add some new features to that here presently. I will have to say I've totally failed with the Patreon newsletter. Um, but maybe I can pull that back together. But I'm also thinking I might substitute another feature for that. That might be a little easier to maintain. But other things in the Patreon have been going very well. And if you're not familiar with my Patreon, you can find out about it at revdonlewis.com. And for anyone who wants to support my work, that's an ideal way to support it. We have all sorts of things that we're working on. I am planning a Samhain ritual on October 28th here on Pagan World TV, which will be working with calling forth spirits and speaking with them. And these are some of the things that I'm looking at doing, and trying not to get too distracted with the messages in the chat room. But there are many interesting messages coming through. I love the fact that people react in real time as we go back and forth in this exchange. I've been doing video now as a producer since maybe 2004. And I had been working on it even before then, but on video or on internet rather, a video producer. Oh, and Christine says, I'm 60 today. Congratulations, Christine. I'm not old, but older, and driving is harder for me. I can't see at night, so I understand that things do change with age. Yeah, it's true. And you'll often see me take my glasses off when I'm doing these things, and that's because they're not the great help they once were. And sometimes I almost feel like I see better without them. And this happened to my mother around this same age. Um, she found that after wearing glasses her whole life, she started to no longer need them nearly as much. And that's interesting. Lady Bitterwind had trouble seeing at night as she came into her 60s, and it's lots of little things like that. One of the things I've noticed is that I get colder much more easily than I previously did. When I was in Nashville, I kept thinking to myself, I know it's not this cold. um, but it felt very cold to me at times. Um, and I don't know if that's age or having lost a great deal of weight, which I think is part of it also. Um, or having lived in Florida for many years. They could all explain that. But it's it's a very interesting time, and it's going to be interesting getting used to being an older person. I find that I was never a fast person. I always walked slower than everyone else, and that has to do with the fact that I was born um, with a certain issue in my leg bones. I literally could not walk as fast as most people, but I'm walking much slower than I ever walked before. But I still get there, and that's all that matters. I have to leave myself a little more time. I think that as we look at life, we have to keep that point of view. That if something maybe is a little harder for us or takes us a little longer, um, that's not bad as long as we still get done what we need to get done. Um, and Tom says that they are at the big 68. Congratulations, Tom. And Kazan says, off topic, but curious when you will set up the Karelian Tradition Museum in Danville. Interestingly enough, that's been a topic of conversation lately. And I don't have an exact answer at this moment, but it's coming. Um, these last few months, a lot of effort was extended on the Parliament and recovering from the Parliament. And now we're ready to get back to work on projects like that. So do expect to be hearing more about it. We have a lot of things coming. And if I'm moving a little slower than I once did, um, I'm surrounded by lots of nice younger people who still move fast. And like I say, I am still getting where I need to go. I will say that there are a lot of things that I find myself dealing with now that I'm getting older and dealing with certain health issues that would never have occurred to me. But they're all dealable. Everything is dealable. And it's just a matter of finding your way. And I think that is true about everything in life. We always have to find our way. I've had many adventures in my life. One of the things I've been doing in the last week or so is really looking at my life and the many adventures and misadventures I have had. And overall, I feel pretty good about it. Um, there are certainly things that could have been done better, but if I could have done better, I would have. Um, I don't really believe in the idea that if I could go back and change things, I'd change them because then I wouldn't be who I am. But I'm also a believer in the idea of the multiverse and the idea that different portions of our soul do live out every variation of every choice that we get. So I do think that some of those other directions I could have gone were gone in, just not by this part of my consciousness. And I and some other people have occasionally seen bits of those other versions of this life. And it is, it's interesting. One of the comments that I made early in this year is that when I had the health crisis that I had in February, that I felt like one life had ended. Um, I was not physically dead, but I felt as though my previous life really had ended, and it was time to go forward in a new direction. And that's where I'm at and what I'm doing. And it's about to gain speed. And I thank you for being here with me as we go forward. Thank you.
Remember, you're right.
And I think it's going to be an interesting and exciting time. And Magical Mermaid says that yes, nostalgia has been in the air for sure. Yes, it has. It's been very much a time for that. So I want to thank you all for being here today. I love you all. I love spending this time with you. Join me again tomorrow, and we will have our new moon and solar eclipse ritual. And let us close with our prayer as we always do. And Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do in our lives, and we ask you to help us to always regenerate and renew our lives. In every moment that we're alive, let us remember that it's always the now moment, that every moment is the first moment of the rest of our lives, and that we are always in that moment of chaos when patterns can be changed if we choose to change them, and new beginnings can be had. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do in our lives. And knowing you're always with us, still from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. May you be blessed now and always.